a dusty garage, an 18-year-old girl wipes grease from her hands, while a millionaire laughs at the very idea that she could fix his broken-down car. But what if the joke is on him, and on all the skeptics who have ever underestimated her natural talent? Stick around and decide whose pride is about to explode. The mid-morning sun beat down on the tin roof of Rourke's Auto and Diesel, making the scent of hot oil and rusted metal thicker than usual. Inside the cluttered workshop, 18-year-old Alice Rourke wiped her hands on a threadbare rag and slid out from beneath a pickup. Her boots thudded as she walked toward the front bay, where the air had grown unusually tense. A luxury rig, sleek, customized, and visibly out of place, blocked half the garage's open floor. Behind it stood a man in an expensive blazer, flanked by two men who looked more like bodyguards than mechanics. His Rolex glinted as he gestured impatiently toward the truck's open hood. "You're telling me this dump is the only shop open in 30 miles?" he scoffed, pacing. "Unbelievable." Inside the cab sat his son, Jamie, lean, cocky, maybe 20, sunglasses perched on his forehead and a Bluetooth headset still blinking in his ear. He barely glanced at Alice when she approached. The men around the wealthy client exchanged knowing smirks when they realized the only person coming to help was her. "Where's the mechanic?" the older man barked. Alice stopped short. "That'd be me today. What's the problem?" The man blinked. "You? She's not kidding?" called a voice from the corner. Her father, Tom Rourke, seated at his workbench, rubbing his left shoulder like it ached. His hair was grayer now, and his limp more pronounced since the last winter storm, but his eyes were sharp with pride. "Trust me, she knows her stuff." Alice didn't wait for approval. She climbed up the side of the truck, inspected the engine bay quickly, and pulled a small flashlight from her back pocket. Jamie snorted. "Look, I'm all for gender equality or whatever," he muttered. "But this engine's got more torque than she has weight." Alice ignored him. She leaned closer, squinting. Her fingers moved with speed and certainty. She unplugged a connector, sniffed the end, then nodded. "Your camshaft position sensor's fried," she said flatly. "Signals bouncing around. That's why the timing's shot." The client blinked again. "You got that from just looking at it?" "From looking, listening, and 20 degrees of hesitation on the crank," she replied, already walking toward the parts wall. "Don't bother," Jamie called after her. "That truck's had custom tuning. You're not going to find parts here, especially not your kind of parts." Alice pulled out a weathered box from under a shelf. She rifled through until she found what she was looking for. A salvaged sensor from an old military-grade Humvee, cleaned, rewired, and stashed just in case. She returned, clipped and soldered the sensor into place with hands that didn't tremble once. A bead of sweat slid down her temple as the engine clanked back together. "Ready?" she said, turning to the client. He folded his arms skeptically. Alice twisted the key. The engine rumbled, hesitated, and then roared to life like a creature startled awake. Perfect, even idle. No lag, no misfire. Silence fell. Even Jamie leaned forward in the seat, eyebrows raised. The older man looked from his truck to Alice, then to her father. "How the hell did she—" "Years," Tom said. "She's been crawling under trucks since she could walk. Learned torque before she learned trigonometry." Alice stepped back and wiped her hands again, this time with a subtle grin. She didn't need applause. The purr of that engine said it all. "Look," she said. "Your rig should hold fine until you get back to your big city garage. But if I were you, I'd clean out the rest of those sensors before one of them shorts in the middle of a hall." The man nodded slowly. "How much do I owe?" Her father stepped in, waving off the amount with a smile. "Call it a veteran's discount. I did 2 tours fixing those same engines overseas." Outside, a couple of townspeople had gathered, drawn by the noise. Someone clapped, then someone else. Word traveled fast in a town like this. Alice Rourke, the mechanic's daughter, just outwrenched a luxury rig and its moneyed owners before lunchtime. Jamie stepped out of the truck, brushing non-existent dust off his jeans. "It was just a sensor," he mumbled, trying to save face. Alice looked at him, steady and calm. It always is, she said. Until someone who knows what to look for finds it. As the group began to disperse, Jamie lingered behind, watching her tighten the bolts on a nearby alternator like it was second nature. Something in his jaw shifted. Not quite admiration, not quite defeat, but something else, a spark of rivalry. And like gasoline near a flame, it was about to ignite. Jamie hadn't spoken much during the ride out of the shop's lot, but the scowl carved across his face said more than words. The purr of the freshly repaired engine only rubbed salt in the wound. By the time he reached the first bend in the road, he'd already made up his mind. He wasn't going to be the laughingstock of a town with one traffic light and a teenage mechanic. 2 days later, he was back, this time alone. He pulled into the dirt lot of Rourke's auto, kicked gravel with his boots, and waited as Alice emerged from the garage. Ponytail high, socket wrench in hand, streaks of oil on her cheek. "You think fixing one truck makes you a legend?" he said, folding his arms. "No," she replied, not looking up. "But I didn't do it for the legend." He stepped closer, jaw clenched. "I'm calling you out. Race. County back loop. End of the week." She blinked, finally raising her eyes. "Race. You and me. You think you're that good? Prove it behind the wheel." There was silence, then a low chuckle from Tom Rourke, who was watching from under the hood of a classic Buick. "Jamie, I've seen Alice take turns most boys would flinch at in Mario Kart." "This ain't Mario Kart," Jamie said. "This is torque, suspension, grit. Let's see if she's got any when it counts." Alice didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the shop's back corner, where an old shell of a 99 Crown Vic sat under a tarp. Heavy frame, civilian body, but a heart that once belonged to law enforcement. She'd stripped and rebuilt half of it already during long, sleepless nights. She nodded. End of the week. Word spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a race anymore. It was the race, talent versus privilege, grit versus gear. Alice, the girl raised on socket wrenches and summer dust, versus Jamie, who had the money, the mods, and a record on the amateur circuit. Flyers went up at the diner. Bets were whispered over beers. And in the heart of Rourke's auto, something stirred. Alice worked late that night, long after the bay doors had grown shut. Her father sat nearby, polishing his old army medal like he always did when memories got loud. She knew the signs, the distant stare, the clenched hands, the flinch when the air compressor hissed too suddenly. The VA hadn't helped. Neither had the sleepless nights. But the shop was his anchor, and now hers too. The Crown Vic was stripped to the bones. She spent hours rebuilding the suspension with discarded performance parts from totaled imports and forgotten customs. A turbo salvaged from a junked WRX. Coilovers from an abandoned rally car. The engine she rebuilt bolt by bolt, using nothing but instinct and a growing fire in her chest. Each part she bolted on wasn't just a fix, it was therapy. Every clank of metal, every twist of a wrench, whispered back, "You are not small. You are not invisible." Jamie, meanwhile, was tuning his ride with a team of professionals. His father had shipped in a fresh set of performance tires, a new intake system, and the best street-legal ECU map money could buy. His car looked like a magazine cover. Alice's looked like it had just survived the apocalypse. But the town saw past the paint. They saw her hands, bruised, calloused, driven. They saw the way she tested each mod not on a dyno, but by feel, listening to the growl of the engine, to how it shifted under weight, to how it responded when she pushed it beyond what it was built for. She wasn't just tuning a car. She was building a weapon. 3 nights before race day, she came home to find her father sitting on the porch, gripping a cold coffee and staring at nothing. The shadows under his eyes were deeper than usual. "You okay?" she asked. He gave a tired smile. "Yeah, just thinking about how proud your mom would have been, about how far you've come." She sat next to him, silent. "You know," he added after a beat, "you don't have to prove anything. Not to him. Not to anyone." "I'm not doing it for them," she said softly. "I'm doing it for me." He nodded, then reached into his coat and handed her an old patch. Faded green. Unit insignia. I stitched that onto every rig I fixed overseas. Kept it all these years. Maybe it belongs on yours now. Alice stared at it, heart swelling, throat tight. Thanks, Dad. The night before the race, Alice stood alone in the shop. The Crown Vic was ready. Sanded, bolted, patched. Not flashy, not perfect, but hers. She stitched the patch onto the seatbelt strap, fired the engine, and listened. Purred low and mean. Yet when the shop fell silent and only the tick of cooling metal kept her company, a knot twisted deep in Alice's stomach. What if the Crown Vic blew a gasket in front of half the county? What if losing meant forfeiting the shop's last sliver of credibility, and the overdue mortgage payment her father never mentioned but she'd seen in the mailbox? She set the torque wrench down, pressed her forehead to the cold fender, and let the fear crawl through her veins. Only after a shaky breath did she run her thumb across the frayed unit patch and whisper, "Okay, Dad, time to find out what we're made of." Outside, the town buzzed. People were choosing sides. But Alice didn't need sides. She had something stronger. She had purpose. And soon, that back road was going to feel every inch of it. Golden hour in the countryside painted everything in deep amber and soft pinks. The cracked blacktop shimmered in the dying sunlight, and the air buzzed with nervous energy and the distant thump of subwoofers. Rows of pickups and muscle cars formed a loose parking lot around the old county backroad loop. Locals leaned on tailgates, sipping sodas and beer, buzzing with anticipation. At the far end of the field, Alice tightened her gloves in silence. Her Crown Vic sat squat and unassuming. Its matte gray primer coat gave nothing away. But under the hood, it hummed with barely restrained energy. Every bolt, every weld, every adjustment had been a decision. Nothing was wasted. Across from her, Jamie's machine gleamed like it had just rolled out of a SEMA show. Polished to perfection, it growled with precision-tuned rage. His pit crew was finishing up final diagnostics, but Alice noticed something they didn't. A faint puff of steam curling from his hood hinge. Subtle, but it was there. Tom Rourke stood beside Alice, a steady hand on her shoulder. "No matter how this goes," he said, "you already turned more heads than any victory could." Alice smiled, pulling down her goggles. "Then I might as well finish the job." The flag dropped. Engines roared like wild animals unleashed. Jamie's car leapt forward with a fierce growl, tires gripping the asphalt as if angry at the earth. He took the first turn aggressively, drifting wide but holding traction. Alice didn't chase yet. She stayed close in his draft, watching, feeling. Her car moved like it was part of her body. The crowd, scattered behind hay bales and up on hilltops, shouted as the two racers blurred past. The loop wasn't a circuit. It was a patchwork of forgotten county roads, some still paved, others little more than packed gravel. It was a test of reflexes, nerve, and knowing exactly where to risk everything. Halfway in, Jamie had carved out a 3-second lead. His car's power was evident, but it was being pushed hard. Too hard. Alice noticed how he didn't ease off between curves. No coasting, no strategic braking, just raw aggression. And the puff of steam she'd noticed earlier? Now a whisper of white trailing behind him. Alice smiled grimly. He didn't check his cooling system. She began her counterattack. It wasn't brute force, it was art. She brake-tapped through the hairpin like a dancer on tempo, kept her RPMs high through the gravel straights, and let gravity and timing do half the work. Jamie's lead shrank with every mile. By the time they hit the long S-curve at the far end of the loop, the gap was 1.5 seconds. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the course. Dust swirled in their wake. Spectators leaned in. You could feel it. Something was about to happen. And then it did. As they exited a blind curve near Miller's Creek Bridge, a deer bolted onto the road. Jamie didn't see it until the last second, and slammed the brakes hard, fishtailing. Alice saw the animal a split second sooner. Time slowed. She had two choices. Swerve left into a ditch. Tap Jamie's back bumper and straighten his line, risking her own alignment or worse. She took the second. The impact wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Jamie's car snapped forward, barely missing the deer, but the jolt knocked his radiator hose loose. Steam blasted into the air like a geyser. Alice downshifted and surged past. The final stretch was hers. The crowd erupted as she crossed the finish line, her car rumbling low and defiant. But she didn't raise her arms in triumph. She didn't even get out. Instead, she skidded to a stop and jumped from her seat, sprinting back up the road. Jamie's car had rolled to a stop, hood steaming violently. He stood outside it, stunned. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, still dazed. "You hit me. You were about to eat venison and a tree," she said, pulling off her gloves. "You're welcome." He looked at her, and then didn't have something snarky to say. The crowd didn't laugh this time. They cheered the race and the moment, for the respect earned. Alice looked back at her car. Beaten, dust-covered, glorious. She'd crossed the line first, but that wasn't the real victory. The real win was knowing she raced her way. Clean, precise, unapologetically herself. And even Jamie, tight-lipped, red-faced Jamie, knew it. As twilight set in, and the crowd began to disperse under the stars, whispers turned to talk, and talk turned to stories. About the girl who built her own legend, and showed the rich boy with the chrome racer that she deserved it, one bolt at a time. The cheers hadn't yet faded when Alice turned her back on the finish line. While some racers would bask in the spotlight, letting it soak into their ego like gasoline on pavement, Alice jogged toward Jamie's car, still steaming, its hood now fully popped open, releasing a hiss that sounded more like wounded pride than engine pressure. Jamie stood beside it, hands on hips, jaw clenched. Not angry anymore, just quiet. He didn't look at her when she arrived. "Radiator hose blew," she said, crouching beside the engine. "I warned you about the overheating. I saw it. I thought I could push through." "You almost did," she replied. "But racing isn't about pushing. It's about knowing when to push." He looked at her, and this time, his eyes didn't carry contempt, but curiosity. Humility. "Why'd you help me back there?" he asked. Alice didn't answer right away. She checked a few clamps, twisted a frayed wire, wiped her hands with a rag that was more grease than fabric. "Because someone had to," she finally said. "Doesn't matter who's ahead if the race ends in a wreck." Jamie nodded. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was honest. That was enough. Behind them, the crowd had begun to trickle in, drawn less by the race's end and more by what was happening after. There was something poetic about it. The girl who won didn't gloat. The guy who lost didn't storm off. They stood there, hood open, elbows deep in compromise. Tom Rourke arrived moments later, his limp more pronounced than usual after standing for so long. He gave Jamie a brief nod, then rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Word spreads fast in towns like ours," he said. "And tonight, the story isn't about horsepower. It's about heart." By the next morning, photos had flooded local feeds. Alice side by side with Jamie, sleeves rolled, tools in hand. One shot captured the precise moment she leaned over his engine, the sky dusky behind her, like a torch being passed. And something shifted. The next afternoon, a gleaming car crunched onto the gravel outside Rourke's auto. Jamie's father stepped out, no entourage, ball cap in hand. In front of Alice, Jamie, and half the town, he cleared his throat and said, "I mistook money for mastery. Yesterday, a young woman with a salvage bin turbo proved me wrong. Alice, I owe you an apology and some respect." The words felt rusty, but the sincerity cut through any lingering smirk in the crowd. He unfolded a document from his jacket. "Consider this a start," he said, offering Tom a 3-year maintenance contract for his entire shipping fleet, parts prepaid, labor at Alice's rates. The deal wiped out back taxes in one stroke and funded the long-dreamed hydraulic lift. Tom's knees wobbled. Alice caught his elbow, realizing that the victory lap she'd skipped was circling back as a secure future for their home base. Customers began calling the shop again, not just for repairs, but for advice. Parents brought their daughters in to meet Alice. And Jamie? He returned, not with swagger, but with his tool belt and a stack of manuals. "I figured if you can build that monster out of scraps," he said, gesturing to the Crown Vic, "maybe I could learn a thing or two." Alice raised an eyebrow. "You want to apprentice?" "I want to earn my way back on the track. And I'd rather learn from the best." It wasn't just words. He swept floors, sorted inventory, helped Tom fix the rusted-out brake lathe that had been sitting dead for months. The shop, once quiet and on the edge of shutting down, started humming again. Machinery, conversation, and momentum all blending together. A few weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, the first open build day took place. Alice's idea. Anyone from town could bring their car, bike, or even lawnmower to the lot and get help making it street legal, roadworthy, or just plain cooler. No judgment, no gatekeeping. The old racing loop was cleaned up. Hay bales became permanent barriers. Locals installed timing equipment. The county sheriff even stopped by, not to shut it down, but to donate cones and encourage the event. "Better here than out on the highway," he said, tipping his hat. By summer's end, what started as a dare had turned into a tradition. The Dust Loop Rally became a monthly event, and Alice, never one for speeches, was its heart. Reporters came once or twice, trying to frame it all as some quirky girl mechanic story. But they always missed the point. Alice wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She'd already done that. Now she was building engines, building community, building a place where skill mattered more than nameplates or wallets. One evening, as she and Jamie closed up the shop, she looked at him across the lift. "You know," she said, "I hated you the day we met." Jamie chuckled. "I earned that. But I respect what you've done since," she added. "You stopped pretending." He looked around the garage, the humming lights, the scattered tools, the mix of new friends and old skeptics now working side by side. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said. "Doing something real." Alice nodded. "Feels like home." And with that, they wheeled the bay doors shut as the sun dipped behind the hills. Engine grease on their hands, dust on their boots, and the road still wide open in front of them. This journey reminds us that skill has no age or dress code and courage needs no permission. If you were Alice or Jamie, what turn would your pride take on that back road? Tell us below, and if you enjoyed this story, give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that leave doubt choking on dust. See you in the next video.